We know that babies are listening and learning in the womb. We know that they may even understand before they are born what parents are thinking and feeling. What we have discovered in the last 10 years will change forever how we look at ourselves, but more importantly, how we understand and relate to our children. Hello, I'm Kitty Hilton, and welcome to our program on pregnancy, birth, and bonding with Joseph Chilton Pearce. For more than 30 years, Joe has challenged audiences around the world by questioning why, as human beings, we haven't developed to our full potential. As you will soon discover, Joe is very concerned about the way we welcome our children into the world. His explorations into the full realm of human development began with the publication of his first book, Crack in the Cosmic Egg. This was followed by his national bestseller, The Magical Child, and most recently, Evolution's End. Let's join Joseph Chilton Pearce and a group of parents, educators, and healthcare providers as they explore one of the most critical periods of a person's life: pregnancy, birth, and bonding.
Every time we have intellectually interfered with a 15 billion year process in preparation, that intellectual interference has been paid for at a bitter price. And we never learn. Intellect never learns that. And also we make money off of it, so immediately anything goes. At any rate, birth itself is, of course, a mammalian process. We know, and this is not just a joke, we know this is handled through the mammalian brain structure. And we know we've inherited that from millions of years of genetic encoding. And that mammalian, we call these mammary glands, those marvelous protuberances, mammary glands for good reason. They're mammalian. They're inherited from our mammalian ancestors. Paul MacLean did some of his most brilliant work on how, in order to build great new unprogrammed, open-ended, creative neural structures, you would have to have increasingly greater nurturing and care of your offspring and prolonged periods of total helplessness in your offspring for very good reasons. In the more primitive creatures, you can hardwire the whole response pattern to the world right into it. And you need very little nurturing. You need very little modeling or guidance. Those hardwired instinctual patterns of intelligence just can fire right in, and the creature is very quickly independent. But when you start adding great open-ended, unprogrammed possibilities in, as our great neural structures are, particularly the frontal lobes, as we'll talk about later, then you have to have a prolonged period in which the hardwiring or hardwired stuff is replaced by software, so to speak, to use those terms, and the child is critically dependent upon modeling and prolonged period of helplessness, the in-arms period, and so on. And so we find that birth being a mammalian process, there are millions of years of genetically encoded intelligence in the woman that knows exactly what to do at birth. Nature leaves nothing out. Kennel and Klaus were really quite right with this, in spite of Diane Ayers, when they said nature would provide this cascade of redundant processes. Not just going to leave it up to one or two things, but a redundant cascade of processes overlapping to make sure that this proper nurturing of this incredibly fragile but powerful system takes place. All mammals on Earth, when they get ready to deliver, and we operate out of that mammalian brain at delivery, seek out the quietest, safest, most private, dark spot. Any mammal on Earth, if you interrupt that safety, secure, dark hideaway, the signal that nature fires in is stop the birth process. Any interference of any sort, the birth process is designed to stop and wait for what? For the coast to clear, for the danger to remove. The mother might even change her birthing place. If that place is going to be not safe, we'll go somewhere else. And that's inherent within our whole system. At the first sign of interference, the birth process tends to stop and wait for the coast to clear. And of course, if the coast never clears, then you've got to do lots of other things intellectually to get the system going. We'll start, first of all, with Whittleston, University of Adelaide in Australia. I've been back there several times. And Whittleston years ago claimed that the mother's heartbeat was the most profound impact on the infant from the moment of conception on. That it literally, the system imprints to it on a cellular level, and later the entire neural system imprints to the mother's heartbeat. And we do know it has a profound effect on the infant's own heartbeat, even though they're at two totally different rates. That brings us up to the claim by Kennel and Klaus, which is certainly verified by research all over the world. I don't know why we don't recognize what's happened to the British National Childbirth Trust, the Swedish Pediatrics Institute, the groups in Australia, and all who've been working on this issue for years, which prove this conclusively, that what the most critical issue immediately after birth is skin-to-skin contact between the mother and the infant. And we find that throughout human history, the mother has put the infant to the left breast immediately at birth with the umbilical cord intact. It's about exactly the right length that she can put the infant to the left breast at birth without disturbing the umbilical cord. 30% of the child's blood and oxygen supply remains in the placenta for about quite a long time after birth, and slowly will drain into the infant. Then the action in the umbilical cord stops, and at that point, they don't need it anymore. Now, if we look at the connection with the heart, we get into some very interesting research. I've talked about the intelligence of the heart, and of course everyone assumes that this is a metaphor. And it is a metaphor, but it's also a fact. Years ago, they discovered there was something unique about a heart cell. The heart cell contracts and expands. It's different from neuron, which operates on a kind of a vibratory basis. You can take a heart cell out of the heart and put it in the right kind of a fluid and keep it alive for a while. You can't do that with a neuron. If you disconnect a neuron from its connection with other neurons, generally it dies immediately. It has to be in its resonant field in order to operate. But the interesting thing about the heart cell disconnected from the heart was that quickly it lost its rhythmic pulsation and began to fibrillate. That is, flop all around out of rhythm and soon destroy itself and die. Put two heart cells on the slide, and they would both fibrillate in that fashion. The poor little creature can't stand to be cut off from its matrix, from its source, and neither can we, I will say. If we're cut off from our heart, we fibrillate. It just takes us a little longer to die. Now, the interesting thing about these two heart cells is if you bring them close enough together, at a certain point of proximity, spatial proximity, they don't have to touch. There can be a physical barrier between, but at a certain point of spatial proximity, the two heart cells somehow or other communicate with one another and immediately go back into the synchronous rhythm with each other which they experienced in the heart itself. Now, this has we've never been able to explain that. Now, I know why, but this has to be hypothetical. And that is the intelligence which functions through the heart, which is nonverbal, non-personal, it's transpersonal, universal, simply moving for well-being and not individual or anything like that, that this intelligence is non-localized. And the two cells simply have to come into a certain proximity, and then they are sharing the same non-localized field, and they go back into their synchrony with each other. And now if you take the hundreds of billions of cells that go together to make up a heart, all functioning in absolute synchrony with each other, you can see that if one cell can communicate with another across a spatial or physical barrier, then obviously two hearts have some form of communication as well. Now that has to be hypothetical, but there's a lot of evidence to back it up. Now, let's look at some of the other evidence about the heart. This was years ago. Then came along John and Beatrice Lacey, Fels Institute, Yellow Springs, Ohio, operating under a government grant, an NIMH grant, did years of research into the heart and drew the conclusions that there was a direct and intimate dialogue between the heart and the brain, between the heart and the limbic system of the brain. The limbic system being what? The emotional, cognitive structures of the brain that handle all relationship. Remember that? We talked about that earlier. This mammalian brain handles all emotions, all relationships, and that has, the Lacey's claim, direct, unmediated connections with the heart thumping away down in our chest.